Hello, this is History Literacy Ready, Unit 1, Lesson 1, What is History? In this presentation, I'm going to walk you through the different aspects of the lesson and what you might need to know in order to teach it. What do students do in this lesson? Well, they read 4 documents to try to determine what Governor Phobos's motivations were for keeping the Little Rock Nine from entering the previously all-white high school in Little Rock, Arkansas. If you don't remember this incident or you haven't studied it for years, as was the case for me, you could go online and find numerous documents and explanations of it before you actually start this unit. Students also learn about primary and secondary sources in this lesson, and they learn to think about 3 things that historians use: sourcing, contextualization, and corroboration. So what do you need to know? Well, as I said, students are going to be introduced to the idea of primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources were those sources that were written during the time period. Some examples are a proclamation, a telegram, and a newspaper account, and actually these 3 types of sources are used in this lesson. So they come from a perspective that reflects that time. They don't all have to agree, and these won't, and that's what makes this an interesting lesson. A secondary source is reliant on the primary source or sources. And when I refer to primary sources, I'm actually referring to the historical record. This is what historians look at when they come up with their interpretations of history. They write about those primary sources, and what they write is a secondary source. These are interpretive. What historians try to do is look at those documents, look at the historical record, and make some interpretations about how things moved forward in time, what caused something else, what kinds of factors were involved in that causation. And the secondary source in this lesson is a biography about Governor Phobos. The first activity is asking students a question: what do historians do? And the students think about the answer to that question and then write down what their thoughts are. The reason we ask that question is we want to get students thinking about how our understanding of history gets created in the first place by historians. And note that I said created because students won't necessarily have the idea that history is an interpretation after looking at the historical record. A lot of students come to history classes thinking that all historians do is record what happened in the past. A very uncomplicated view of what historians actually do. It's important that students come to realize by the end of this unit that a historical account of an event is actually an interpretation by a historian, and that different interpretations might agree or disagree depending upon the kinds of evidence that they look at and how they interpret that evidence. So as a result of this lesson, we want students' thinking to begin to change. As I said, most students won't believe at the beginning of the lesson that historians are simply recorders of what happened. And this lesson will show them that what happened in history isn't that easily determined. So what you do when you have students read this, have students write about what they think historians do is have that kind of discussion with them. Let them tell you what they think and just hold that in mind, because later on in the lesson we're going to come back to it. The first activity involves students reading some background information and then reading 2 texts, 2 of the 4 that are going to be part of this lesson. They're going to read these texts to answer a question about Phobos's motivations. What were Phobos's motivations for not letting those 9 students in Little Rock, Arkansas attend the high school? What they're going to do is they're going to mark places in the text that help them answer that question. So the two texts are a proclamation and a telegram, and one of the things that you might need to help students with is to recognize that these are particular different structures. Students may not recognize them, so that you'll have to discuss what telegrams were, what a proclamation is, and get them to look at the features of these two texts, which are actually very different. Well, as you read these two documents and as your students read them, you're going to find that the two documents do agree on one thing, and that is Governor Phobos was aware that there could be trouble. The proclamation says that he is going to prevent that trouble by not allowing the students into the high school. And the implication is that what he is doing is he is protecting the students. The telegram talks about that same trouble, but says that Phobos is actually part of it, that he knows about it because he is friends with those who are fomenting the trouble, and he is not acting to protect the 9 students, but to keep them out of the school. So after they read it, I have provided 2 quotes that students can study, one from each of those documents, that should help students to come to that conclusion about the implications of how these 2 documents talk about the issue. Students are going to read the 2 texts. They're going to mark places in the text that answer that question, and then they're going to come back and they're going to have a discussion. After the discussion, if they still haven't talked about the implications of the 2 different documents, then you can show them those 2 quotes. But you're going to start out the discussion in as open-ended a way as possible. In other words, you're going to start out by saying something like, well, what did you discover? How did the proclamation answer the question that you were asked to answer? How did the telegram answer that question? And get students to talk about the different things that they saw in those 2 documents, rather than pointing them exactly to places in the text where you know the answers might be. So before students even begin to read, you might want to work with them on strategies for how to deal with vocabulary words they may not know. The reason you want to do this is because what you're trying to do in this unit is build independence. Students are going to have to be learners, independent learners of vocabulary when they go to college and life. They're always going to be confronted with words they don't know. So in this unit, we teach students that there are several things that they can do. They can look at the context by reading the sentence, reading a little bit before, reading ahead, and try to figure out a possible meaning. They can break a word down into its meaning parts if that's possible. They can look at a dictionary or glossary, and when they do this, they should try to find the definition that fits that context the best. And if those fail, they can always ask their classmates to use them as resources, because some of their classmates may know the meanings of these words, even if they don't. And if they still haven't figured out the meanings of difficult words by the time you get to that group discussion, then that's a good time to bring up those words and have the whole class weigh in on the word meanings. Because there are words they don't know, and because these 2 documents have some unusual features to them, students may be struggling with meaning a bit. Also, it's their first foray into reading history texts. You want to prepare them for the idea that struggle is okay, that we struggle for meaning all the time. In fact, it's an expectation in this unit, and They will struggle, but with your support and with the support of other students, and you can get through it. While students are reading, you want to be walking around the room and checking in on them without giving them answers or pointing to exact places in the text or telling them what the text says in relation to the question. When students discuss the documents in a group, you can ask them what words they're still struggling with, discuss the meanings of the words, and also engage in a discussion of what they found in relation to the questions. In the third activity, students are reading the final two texts. So they're going to read a historical account, that is from the Phobos biography, and they're going to read a newspaper article, which is a primary source. And they're going to be answering the same question, what were Phobos's motivations? The biographical information about Phobos is from the Encyclopedia of Arkansas History and Culture, and I accessed it from a site that was meant to draw in particular potential tourists to Arkansas. So you might ask the question, what might that source mean for how biased the biography might be about a former governor? In other words, we have this official encyclopedia of Arkansas history and culture. Is that going to be a place where you're going to read information about individuals in history in Arkansas that is very negative or very positive? What kinds of things might you expect, being that it is in this venue of an Encyclopedia of Arkansas history and culture? You also want, in reading the final two texts, to emphasize that the different interpretations of Phobos's motivation reflect the kind of information that historians have to take into account. So when historians look at the historical record, those records aren't always going to say exactly the same thing. They're going to add new perspectives on the problem of interpretation. And historians have to sort through all those things to come to some decisions about how they're going to actually interpret the event. So help them see what that means, and that historians do have to make choices and come to some judgments. And that is what you are asking them to do when you're asking them to answer that question about Phobos's motivations. So students are going to determine on their own the answer to the question about Phobos's motivations, and that's after a discussion, so they can take into account everything that everybody discussed before they choose their answer. And then they're going to pick 3 pieces of textual evidence that support that answer. Well, when they make that answer, they're going to be making a claim, and when they go in and choose places from the text, they are learning about evidence. So you need to start using those terms, claims and evidence. So students will get into the idea of argumentation, which is a big focus in this unit, and also all of the units in Literacy Ready. They might not know what evidence means, some will, some won't, so you would want to reinforce that term. So what students are going to end up doing is focusing on the vocabulary of the discipline. What I mean by the vocabulary of the discipline are those words that help students talk to each other about what it is that they are doing when they're reading history. So in this lesson, they have come across primary and secondary sources. They've learned a little bit about sourcing and contextualization and corroboration. Now, the reason they need to understand these now is they're going to come back to these terms and add others as they go throughout this unit, and they're going to help students talk about history. So what is sourcing? Sourcing is paying attention to the author of a text. I'm going to have to go through it then. So what is sourcing? Sourcing is paying attention to the author of a text, a creator of an artifact, and the kind of document or artifact it is. For example, the proclamation was written by the governor, Governor Phobos, and the telegram was written by the mayor of Little Rock. Those matter, and the fact that they are a proclamation and a telegram tell you something about the documents themselves. Contextualization is paying attention to the time frame and the circumstances in which a text was written or an artifact was created, including the audience and the purpose. So, in the case of the proclamation, the audience was the citizenry of the state and Little Rock especially, and the purpose was to let people know what kind of actions he was going to take and his supposed or alleged, I guess, reasons for taking that action. The telegram was written to President Eisenhower, and the purpose was to get President Eisenhower to take some action. So very different audiences and purposes. Corroboration is the extent to which two or more documents agree or disagree. Paying attention to what is corroborated and what is not is a part of corroboration. Finally, at the end of the lesson, students are going to come back to that question that they began the lesson with: what do historians do? They're going to rewrite their answer to the question they answered at the first of the lesson. And you want to remind them that what they're answering now is based upon the things that they learned and discovered and talked about as they read those 4 documents and the background information. What you're looking for is movement from historians record the past to something like historians interpret what happened from multiple, sometimes conflicting primary and secondary sources. So you may see some students get all the way there in one lesson. You may see others not quite there. That's okay, because we're going to keep coming back to that idea all the way through both of the history units. And that's it. So I've just walked you through lesson 1. I hope that has helped, and good luck teaching the lesson.